A cocky young lawyer struts into court, sneering at the elderly black woman sitting quietly in the gallery. But when the judge enters and rushes to embrace her, calling her professor, his smirk vanishes. What happens next will destroy his career forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. The morning sun streamed through the grand windows of the Westridge County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Tyler Hamilton adjusted his crisp navy suit and straightened his red power tie as he strode through the imposing entrance. At 28, he was the youngest associate at Blackwell & Reed, already making waves in the legal community. 6 months out of Harvard Law, where he'd graduated in the top 5% of his class, Tyler carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed the world owed him recognition. "Morning, Mr. Hamilton," called the security guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who'd been working at the courthouse longer than Tyler had been alive. Tyler nodded curtly without breaking stride or making eye contact. Small interactions with service personnel weren't worth his time. His mind was already in the courtroom, rehearsing the arguments he'd present in today's case. A straightforward property dispute, hardly the high-profile criminal defense work he'd dreamed of in law school, but a necessary stepping stone. He'd make partner in record time, everyone said so. The firm's senior partners had taken notice of his sharp mind and sharper tongue. "That kid can eviscerate an opposing counsel's argument before they even finish making it," he'd overheard Mr. Blackwell tell another partner. The comment had swelled his already considerable ego. What they praised as confidence, others might call arrogance, but Tyler didn't concern himself with such distinctions. Results were what mattered, and he got results. The elevator doors opened to the third floor, and Tyler checked his watch. 8:15 a.m., 45 minutes before court would be called to session. Perfect. He preferred arriving early to review his notes one final time and get a feel for the courtroom. Today he'd be appearing before Judge Marcus Reynolds, known for his no-nonsense approach and strict adherence to procedure. Tyler had prepared meticulously. His client, a real estate developer looking to build luxury condos on land that had historically been part of a predominantly black neighborhood, had deep pockets and high expectations. Tyler pushed open the heavy oak doors to courtroom 3C and paused, annoyed to discover he wasn't the first arrival. An elderly black woman sat in the front row, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a modest but well-tailored burgundy dress. She appeared to be in her 70s, with dark skin lined by decades of experience, and was writing something in a small notebook. Ignoring her, Tyler made his way to the defense table and began arranging his materials with practiced precision. His laptop, legal pad, and reference materials were placed at exact angles, a ritual that centered him before each court appearance. He could feel the woman watching him, but refused to acknowledge her presence. Probably a curious retiree with nothing better to do than watch court proceedings, he thought dismissively. After several minutes, he heard the soft tap of a cane and sensed someone approaching. "Excuse me, young man," came a gentle voice with the warm cadence of the Deep South. "I believe you're at the wrong table." Tyler didn't bother looking up. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, ma'am. I represent Westridge Development Corporation. This is the defense table." "I see," the woman said, her tone remaining pleasant despite his curtness. "It's just that in Judge Reynolds's courtroom, he prefers the plaintiff to sit at that table, and the defense at the other." Now Tyler looked up, not bothering to hide his irritation. The woman stood before him, one hand resting on a wooden cane with a polished silver handle, the other holding her notebook. Her eyes, clear and intelligent behind gold-rimmed glasses, met his without wavering. "With all due respect," Tyler said, emphasizing the phrase in a way that conveyed the opposite, "I've appeared in this courtroom before. This is the defense table." It wasn't true. This would be his first time before Judge Reynolds. but he wasn't about to be corrected by some random observer. The woman's expression remained serene. "If you say so. I just thought you might want to know before Marcus arrives." Tyler's eyebrows shot up at the casual use of the judge's first name. Who did this woman think she was? "Marcus? I think you mean Judge Reynolds," he corrected with a condescending smile. "And I'm sure Judge Reynolds has more important things to worry about than which table I sit at." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps you're right. I won't trouble you further." She turned and made her way back to her seat, moving with the deliberate care of someone managing arthritis, but maintaining a quiet dignity. Tyler returned to his preparations, but his concentration had been broken. The encounter had irritated him more than it should have. The audacity of someone like her, trying to tell him how to conduct himself in court. He glanced at her briefly. She had returned to her writing, seemingly unbothered by their interaction. By 8:45, the courtroom had begun to fill. The plaintiff's attorney, a woman in her 40s with a reputation for thoroughness if not brilliance, arrived and hesitated when she saw Tyler at what was apparently her usual table. After a moment's consideration, she took her seat at the opposite table without comment. Tyler allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. At 8:55, the bailiff entered and began preparing for the judge's arrival. He nodded respectfully to the elderly woman, who returned the greeting warmly. Tyler noticed several other court officers doing the same. Probably a courthouse regular, he thought. Some people had nothing better to do than watch legal proceedings day in and day out. "All rise," the bailiff called precisely at 9 a.m. "The Honorable Judge Marcus Reynolds presiding." The side door opened, and Judge Reynolds entered, his black robes flowing as he took his place at the bench. In his late 50s, the judge had a commanding presence, with broad shoulders, close-cropped gray hair, and piercing dark eyes that missed nothing. Tyler straightened his posture automatically. "Be seated," Judge Reynolds said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly through the courtroom. He looked down at the papers before him, then up at the tables, his gaze lingering on Tyler for a moment longer than seemed necessary. "I see we have counsel in the wrong positions today," he remarked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "In my courtroom, Mr. Hamilton, the plaintiff sits at the left table and the defense at the right." Tyler felt heat rise to his face. "My apologies, Your Honor. I wasn't aware of your preference." "Clearly," the judge replied dryly. "However, since you've both settled in, we'll proceed as is for today." He glanced toward the front row, and his expression softened noticeably. "Good morning, Professor Washington. Always a pleasure to see you in my courtroom." The elderly woman inclined her head graciously. "Good morning, Marcus. I hope Ellen and the children are well?" "Very well, thank you. Michael just started at Georgetown Law, following in your footsteps." "Wonderful news. He has his grandfather's intelligence and his father's work ethic. A formidable combination." Tyler felt his stomach tighten as the exchange continued for a few more moments before Judge Reynolds returned his attention to the matter at hand. "Professor Washington? Who was this woman?" "Now, Westridge Development Corporation versus the East Side Historical Preservation Society," the judge announced. "Ms. Chen, as counsel for the plaintiff, you may present your opening statement." As the opposing counsel rose, Tyler struggled to refocus. He'd started on the wrong foot, something he never did. The elderly woman, Professor Washington, had tried to help him, and he'd dismissed her like she was nothing. Worse, she apparently had a personal relationship with the judge, who now looked at Tyler with what seemed like thinly veiled disapproval. The morning proceeded, with Ms. Chen presenting a compelling case for why the East Side neighborhood should be preserved as a historical district, preventing Westridge Development's planned luxury condos. Tyler had prepared counter-arguments based on property rights and economic development, but each time he rose to speak, he felt Judge Reynolds's critical gaze upon him. During a brief recess, Tyler approached his client, a middle-aged white man with an expensive haircut and a perpetual frown. "Mr. Westridge, I think we should consider a more conciliatory approach." Judge Reynolds seemed sympathetic to the preservation argument. "That's not what I'm paying you for, Hamilton," Westridge replied sharply. "I was told you were a fighter, so fight." Tyler nodded, straightening his shoulders. This case was important for his reputation at the firm. He couldn't afford to show weakness. When court resumed, Tyler adopted a more aggressive stance, challenging the historical significance of the neighborhood and emphasizing his client's legal right to develop the property. As he spoke, he noticed Professor Washington watching him, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. Judge Reynolds's face had hardened into a mask of judicial impartiality, but something in his eyes suggested disappointment. By lunchtime, Tyler knew the morning hadn't gone as planned, but he still believed he could turn things around in the afternoon session. Little did he know that his encounter with Professor Washington was about to change the course of not just the case, but his entire approach to the practice of law. During the lunch recess, Tyler retreated to a quiet corner of the courthouse cafe, stabbing at his salad while reviewing his notes. His mind kept returning to the morning's events, particularly his dismissive interaction with Professor Washington. The woman clearly held some significance in Judge Reynolds's life, and Tyler had managed to get off on the wrong foot with both of them. His phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Blackwell. "How's the Westridge case going? Client is a major priority." The subtext was clear. Don't screw this up. Tyler's jaw tightened. He needed this win. "Is this seat taken?" The familiar voice made Tyler look up sharply. Professor Washington stood before him, her cane in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. Tyler hesitated, then gestured to the empty chair across from him. Professional courtesy demanded at least this much, though he wasn't in the mood for conversation. "Please." She settled into the chair with a small sigh. "Thank you, Mr. Hamilton." "Tyler, isn't it?" "Yes," he replied, surprised she knew his first name. "Tyler Hamilton." "Eleanor Washington," she offered, extending her hand across the table. Her grip was stronger than he expected. "I believe we got off on the wrong foot this morning." Tyler forced a polite smile. "I apologize if I was short with you, Professor. Court days can be stressful." She waved away his excuse. "No need to apologize, though I should mention that in 45 years of legal practice, I've found that how one handles stress reveals more about character than how one behaves in calm waters." 45 years of legal practice? Tyler reassessed the woman before him. She had to be in her 70s, which meant she'd entered the legal profession in the 1970s, a time when both her race and gender would have presented formidable barriers. "You're an attorney?" he asked, his tone conveying surprise before he could catch himself. Professor Washington's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Was, young man. Now I'm Professor Emeritus at Georgetown Law. Constitutional law was my specialty, though I dabbled in civil rights cases throughout my career." She took a sip of her tea. "I still consult occasionally when a case interests me, like this one." Tyler's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "You're consulting on the East Side preservation case?" "I grew up in East Side," she said simply. "In a little blue house on Magnolia Street that my grandfather built with his own hands after he came north in the Great Migration. That neighborhood represents more than just old buildings, Mr. Hamilton. It represents the story of Black Americans who carved out spaces for themselves in a world that offered them precious few options." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. He'd approached the case purely as a property rights issue, viewing the historical preservation argument as a sentimental obstacle to progress and profit. He hadn't considered the human stories embedded in those streets and structures. "I understand your client sees opportunity there," Professor Washington continued. "Development, revenue, progress. These aren't inherently negative things, but context matters in law as much as in life. With all due respect, Professor, Tyler countered, falling back on his prepared arguments, property owners have rights. The economic benefits of this development would uplift the entire community. Would they? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Or would they displace families who've lived there for generations, replacing affordable housing with luxury units those same families could never afford? Her tone remained conversational, not confrontational. These are the questions Judge Reynolds will be considering. You seem to know the judge well, Tyler observed, probing for information that might help his case. Professor Washington smiled. Marcus was one of my most promising students at Georgetown. I supervised his law review article on historical preservation laws and their intersection with racial justice. He clerked for me when I sat on the federal circuit. Her eyes held Tyler's. He seeks justice, not just adherence to the letter of the law. Remember that this afternoon. Before Tyler could respond, a young clerk approached their table. Professor Washington, Judge Reynolds was hoping you might join him in his chambers before court resumes. Thank you, David. Please tell him I'll be there shortly. She turned back to Tyler as the clerk left. It was interesting talking with you, Mr. Hamilton. I hope you don't mind some unsolicited advice from someone who's walked these halls for many years. Despite himself, Tyler was curious. Please. Legal brilliance without humanity is like a finely tuned engine without a steering wheel, powerful but directionless, and ultimately dangerous. She rose slowly, leaning on her cane. Good luck this afternoon. I suspect you'll need it. Tyler watched her make her way across the cafe, several attorneys and court staff stopping to greet her with obvious respect. He turned back to his salad, appetite gone, mind racing. Professor Washington was clearly more than just an observer in today's proceedings. She represented exactly the kind of opposition his client had dismissed as sentimental bleeding hearts standing in the way of progress. As Tyler gathered his materials and headed back to the courtroom, he passed the door to Judge Reynolds's chambers. Through the partially open door, he glimpsed Professor Washington and the judge, heads bent over what appeared to be old photographs, both laughing warmly. The casual intimacy of the scene was jarring compared to the judge's formal demeanor in court. The afternoon session began with Tyler feeling distinctly off balance. Judge Reynolds's questions seemed designed to expose the weaknesses in his arguments rather than clarify them. Each time Tyler emphasized property rights and economic development, the judge pressed him on community impact, historical significance, and the precedent such a decision would set. Mr. Hamilton, Judge Reynolds said after a particularly tone-deaf response about property values, are you familiar with the Supreme Court case Berman v. Parker? Tyler hesitated. The case sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't recall the details. Not the specifics, Your Honor. Interesting. It's a foundational case regarding public interest in private development. I suggest you review it before tomorrow's session. The judge's gaze flicked briefly to Professor Washington, who sat quietly observing from the front row. The court held that the concept of public welfare is broad and inclusive, that the values it represents are spiritual as well as physical, aesthetic as well as monetary. Tyler felt his face grow warm. He should have known that case. It was clearly relevant to their arguments, and he'd been caught unprepared. Mr. Westridge leaned over, whispering harshly, "What the hell, Hamilton? You're getting demolished in there." "I'll turn it around," Tyler whispered back, but even to his own ears, the words lacked conviction. As the afternoon wore on, Tyler's confidence eroded further. Ms. Chen, the opposing counsel, seemed perfectly prepared for every question, citing case law and historical precedents with ease. Her arguments resonated with Judge Reynolds, who nodded thoughtfully as she spoke about the cultural significance of the East Side neighborhood. By 4 o'clock, when Judge Reynolds announced they would continue the next morning, Tyler knew he was in trouble. The case he'd thought would be straightforward was anything but, and his usual approach wasn't working. As court adjourned, Mr. Westridge stormed out without speaking to him, a bad sign. Tyler gathered his materials slowly, his mind already racing through what additional research he'd need to do tonight. As he was about to leave, he noticed Professor Washington still seated in the front row, making notes in her small leather-bound notebook. On impulse, he approached her. "Professor Washington?" She looked up, her expression neutral. "Yes, Mr. Hamilton?" He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. "I believe I may have underestimated the complexity of this case." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Indeed. That's an interesting observation. Would you—" Tyler cleared his throat. "Would you be willing to tell me more about the East Side neighborhood, about your experiences there?" Professor Washington studied him for a long moment, as if assessing his sincerity. "That would depend, young man, on whether you're asking to gain tactical advantage for your case, or because you genuinely wish to understand what's at stake." The question caught Tyler off guard. In law school and at the firm, the distinction wouldn't have mattered. Any information that helped win was good information. But something in Professor Washington's steady gaze made him consider his true motivation. "I'm not sure I know the answer to that yet," he admitted finally. Her expression softened. "That's the most honest thing you've said all day, Mr. Hamilton. Perhaps there's hope for you yet." She closed her notebook and rose carefully to her feet. 7 o'clock, Delia's Cafe on Jefferson Street. It's in East Side. Come hungry, and come ready to listen. As she walked away, tapping her cane gently against the polished floor, Tyler realized he was standing at a crossroads, though he couldn't yet see where each path might lead. Tyler drove slowly down Jefferson Street, his sleek BMW looking conspicuously out of place among the older, modest vehicles that lined the curb. The neighborhood wasn't what he had expected. Based on his client's descriptions and the development plans he'd reviewed, he'd imagined a run-down area desperate for revitalization. Instead, he found well-maintained homes with small, neat gardens. Children played in a community park while older residents sat on porches, chatting in the warm evening air. True, the buildings were old, many dating back to the 1920s and 30s according to the case files, but there was an unmistakable vibrancy to the community that the sterile development documents had failed to capture. Tyler checked his watch, 6:45 p.m. He was early, as usual. Delia's Cafe occupied the corner of Jefferson and Maple, a modest brick building with large windows and a hand-painted sign. Flowering plants hung in baskets along the front, and a bell chimed softly as Tyler pushed open the door. Inside, the cafe was warm and inviting, with mismatched vintage furniture that somehow worked together. Black and white photographs covered the walls, depicting what appeared to be the neighborhood throughout different decades. "Welcome to Delia's," called a woman from behind the counter. She was perhaps 50, with warm brown skin and a bright smile. "Take any seat you like. Professor Washington called to say she's running a few minutes late." Tyler nodded, surprised. "Thank you. I'll just—" He gestured to an empty table by the window. "Can I get you something while you wait? Our peach iced tea is made fresh daily." "That sounds perfect, thank you," Tyler replied, finding himself responding to her warmth despite his preoccupation with the case. As he settled into his chair, Tyler pulled out his phone to check emails, then paused. Instead, he began to really look at his surroundings. The cafe wasn't crowded, just a few tables occupied by what appeared to be locals. At one, an older man was helping what looked to be his granddaughter with homework. At another, two middle-aged women were deep in conversation over coffee. The atmosphere was comfortable, familiar, like a living room shared by an extended family. The woman from the counter approached with his iced tea. "I'm Delia," she said, placing the glass before him. "You must be the lawyer Eleanor mentioned." "Tyler Hamilton," he confirmed, extending his hand. "This is a lovely place you have." "Been in my family for 3 generations," Delia said with pride. "My grandfather opened it in 1948. Back then, black folks couldn't eat in most restaurants downtown, so he created a place where the community could gather." She gestured to a photograph on the wall showing a much younger version of the cafe, with a crowd of people celebrating its opening. "That's him cutting the ribbon." Before Tyler could respond, the door chimed again, and Professor Washington entered, exchanging warm greetings with several patrons before making her way to his table. "I see you've met Delia," she said as she settled into the chair across from him. "Her peach tea is legendary in these parts." "It's excellent," Tyler agreed, finding that he meant it. "Good evening, Eleanor," Delia said warmly. "The usual?" "Please, dear. And perhaps a menu for Mr. Hamilton?" "Our dinner special is Eleanor's favorite, catfish with Delia's grandmother's secret spice blend, served with collard greens and sweet potato souffle." "That sounds wonderful," Tyler said, surprising himself. Fine dining was more his usual style, not neighborhood cafes. After Delia left, Professor Washington regarded him thoughtfully. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Hamilton. I confess I wasn't certain you would." "Tyler, please," he offered. "And I appreciate the invitation. This neighborhood, it's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Tyler considered his answer carefully. "Something more dilapidated, I suppose." The development proposal emphasized how the area needed revitalization. "Ah," Professor Washington nodded. "The eternal justification for displacement, describing vibrant communities as blighted to legitimize their destruction." She gestured around them. "East Side isn't wealthy, but it's rich in ways that don't appear on balance sheets." Their conversation paused as Delia returned with Professor Washington's tea and a basket of cornbread that sent a mouth-watering aroma wafting across the table. "Tell me about your client, Tyler," Professor Washington said after Delia departed. "What does Richard Westridge know about this community?" Tyler broke off a piece of cornbread. "He sees it as a prime location for development, close to downtown, waterfront access, undervalued real estate. And the people who live here? What does he know about them?" The question made Tyler uncomfortable. In truth, the development proposal had treated the existing community as an abstraction, an obstacle to be cleared rather than people with lives and histories. "I don't believe he's spent much time here," he admitted, "as I suspected." Professor Washington's tone wasn't accusatory, merely matter-of-fact. "Would you like to know what would happen to Delia's Cafe under your client's development plan?" Tyler nodded, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. "It would be demolished, along with every other business on this block. The revitalization plan includes upscale boutiques and chain restaurants that current residents couldn't afford to patronize, much less operate." She sipped her tea. Delia would receive market value for the property, of course. But how do you put a price on 3 generations of history? On being the place where community celebrations are held, where children do homework after school while their parents finish work, where elders gather to share stories that keep our heritage alive. Tyler was saved from responding immediately by the arrival of their food. The catfish was perfectly cooked, the cornbread light and sweet, simple food prepared with expert care. As they ate, Professor Washington told him stories about East Side, how it had formed in the 1920s when black families, restricted by redlining from buying homes in most parts of the city, had built their own community here. How during the civil rights era, the neighborhood had been a hub of activism and organization. How even during the urban decay of the 1970s and 80s, residents had banded together to combat crime and maintain their homes when city services were neglected. "My father was a postal worker," she told him. "My mother taught at the elementary school 3 blocks from here. They saved for years to buy our home on Magnolia Street, one of the very houses your client plans to demolish." "I didn't realize," Tyler said quietly. The human dimension of the case, so easily overlooked in legal briefs and development plans, was becoming uncomfortably real. After dinner, Professor Washington suggested a short walk. The summer evening was pleasant, and residents called greetings to her as they passed. She introduced Tyler to several people: a retired doctor who ran a free clinic on weekends, a young couple renovating a historic home, an elderly man who had marched with Dr. King. They stopped before a small blue house with a well-tended garden. "This was my family's home," Professor Washington said softly. "I grew up here, studied for the LSAT on that front porch, celebrated passing the bar in that living room." The property was modest but beautiful, with architectural details from the 1920s lovingly preserved. "It's a lovely home," Tyler said, meaning it. "The developer's plans show a parking structure where it stands." Her voice held no self-pity, only a deep sadness. Progress, they call it. As they continued walking, Tyler found himself seeing the neighborhood through new eyes, not as a collection of properties to be acquired and demolished, but as a living, breathing community with deep roots and shared history. "You're quiet, Tyler," Professor Washington observed as they circled back toward the cafe. "I'm thinking," he replied honestly, "about the case, about what's really at stake here." "Good." She stopped, turning to face him directly. "The law isn't just about statutes and precedents, Tyler. It's about people, their lives, their dreams, their dignity. When we forget that, we may win cases, but we lose our humanity." Back at the cafe, as Tyler prepared to leave, Professor Washington handed him a slim book. "East Side, An American Story," he read from the cover. "I wrote it 10 years ago," she explained. "It documents the history of this neighborhood and others like it across the country. I thought it might help you understand what we're fighting to preserve." Tyler accepted the book, feeling its weight in more ways than one. "Thank you for dinner, Professor, and for perspective." She smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "Call me Eleanor. And remember, Tyler, the best lawyers know when to fight and when to find another path. I suspect you'll be making that choice very soon." Driving back to his downtown apartment, the lights of East Side receding in his rearview mirror, Tyler knew something fundamental had shifted within him. The question was what he would do about it when he walked into court tomorrow morning. Tyler barely slept that night. He sat on his sleek leather couch in his minimalist downtown apartment, Eleanor's book open on his lap, legal pads and case files spread across his glass coffee table. The contrast between the sterile luxury of his surroundings and the warm vibrancy of East Side wasn't lost on him. By 3 a.m. he'd read the entire book, made extensive notes, and researched Berman v. Parker and other relevant precedents that he should have known before walking into court. The deeper he dug, the more uncomfortable he became with his client's position and his own role in advancing it. At 6 a.m. his phone rang. It was James Blackwell, the firm's founding partner. "Hamilton," Blackwell barked without preamble. "Westridge called me last night, extremely unhappy with your performance. He said you're getting steamrolled in there. What the hell is going on?" Tyler rubbed his eyes. "The case is more complex than we initially assessed," he began carefully. "Judge Reynolds has concerns about the historical and cultural significance of the neighborhood, and I don't care if George Washington himself slept there," Blackwell cut in. "Westridge is paying us a fortune to get this deal done. Find a way to win, or I'll put Peterson on it instead." The threat was clear. Peterson was Tyler's main competition at the firm, a skilled attorney with fewer qualms and more political connections. Being pulled from the case would be a public humiliation and a serious setback to Tyler's partnership aspirations. "That won't be necessary," Tyler said firmly. I'll handle it. See that you do. And Hamilton, remember what I told you when we hired you. At Blackwell and Reed, we don't represent causes. We represent clients. After hanging up, Tyler stood at his wall of windows, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. Blackwell's words echoed in his mind, alongside Eleanor's from the previous evening. The law isn't just about statutes and precedents, Tyler. It's about people. He showered and dressed with methodical precision, selecting his most expensive suit and tie, armor for the battle ahead. But as he knotted his tie, he couldn't shake the image of Delia's grandfather cutting the ribbon at the cafe opening, or Eleanor's childhood home with its carefully preserved architectural details and lush garden. Mr. Westridge was waiting for him on the courthouse steps, his expression thunderous. "I've spoken with Blackwell," he said without greeting. "This should have been a slam dunk. Instead, we're getting outmaneuvered by some community preservation group and their bleeding heart lawyer." "Mr. Westridge," Tyler began, choosing his words carefully. "After reviewing the case more thoroughly, I believe we need to consider a compromise position. The historical significance of East Side." "I don't pay you to consider compromise," Westridge snapped. "I pay you to win. That land is worth millions once we clear those old buildings and put up our development. I've already pre-sold half the condos. But the community is not my concern." Westridge's voice was cold. "Get in there and do your job, Hamilton, or I'll find someone who will." Inside the courthouse, Tyler saw Eleanor speaking quietly with Ms. Chen, the plaintiff's attorney. Both women looked up as he approached, their conversation ceasing. "Good morning, Tyler," Eleanor greeted him, her expression revealing nothing of their dinner conversation. "Professor Washington, Ms. Chen." He nodded to both women, then hesitated. "May I speak with you privately for a moment, Eleanor?" She excused herself from Ms. Chen and followed Tyler to a quiet alcove. "You look troubled," she observed. "I stayed up all night reading your book, researching cases," he admitted. "I understand the neighborhood's significance now, but my client—" He trailed off. "Wants what he wants regardless of the cost to others," she finished for him. "It's a familiar story." "I have obligations as his attorney," Tyler said, though the words felt hollow even to himself. "Yes, you do," Eleanor agreed. "But those obligations don't require you to check your conscience at the door. There are often multiple paths to resolution, Tyler. The most adversarial isn't always the most effective." Before he could respond, the courthouse doors opened, and Mr. Westridge entered, his gaze finding Tyler and narrowing with suspicion when he saw Eleanor. "Think carefully about what kind of attorney, what kind of person you want to be," Eleanor said quietly. Then she walked away, her cane tapping gently against the marble floor. Court was called to session promptly at 9 a.m. Judge Reynolds surveyed the room, his gaze lingering momentarily on Tyler before moving to Eleanor in her customary front row seat. "Before we continue with arguments," the judge began, "I'd like to address a procedural matter. It has come to my attention that Westridge Development filed incomplete historical impact assessments when applying for the demolition permits central to this case." He looked directly at Tyler. "Mr. Hamilton, would you care to explain this oversight?" Tyler felt a cold sensation in his stomach. This was the first he'd heard of any missing assessments. He glanced at Westridge, who avoided his gaze, then back to the judge. "Your Honor, I was not aware of any deficiencies in the filings. May I request a brief recess to confer with my client?" "Granted. 20 minutes, Mr. Hamilton." In a small conference room, Tyler confronted Westridge. "Did you know about these missing historical assessments?" Westridge shrugged. "The full assessments would have delayed the project by months. We submitted preliminary findings that supported our position." "You submitted incomplete information to the court," Tyler clarified, his tone hardening. "That's not just an oversight, Mr. Westridge. That borders on deliberate misrepresentation." Don't be so dramatic, Hamilton. It happens all the time in development. We pay a fine, submit the full assessments later, and move forward. Not in Judge Reynolds' courtroom, it doesn't. Tyler paced the small room. He takes historical preservation seriously. This could undermine our entire case. Then find a way around it, Westridge insisted. That's what I'm paying you for. When court resumed, Tyler found himself at a crossroads. He could attempt to minimize the significance of the missing assessments as his client wanted, or he could acknowledge the error and request time to remedy it properly. The former might please Westridge and Blackwell in the short term, but would likely damage his credibility with Judge Reynolds. The latter would anger his client, but preserve his professional integrity. "Mr. Hamilton," Judge Reynolds prompted, "I'm waiting for an explanation regarding the incomplete historical assessments." Tyler straightened his shoulders. "Your Honor, after conferring with my client, I must acknowledge that the historical impact assessments submitted with the permit applications were indeed incomplete. This was..." He hesitated, then continued firmly. "This was not an oversight, but a deliberate decision to expedite the application process." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Westridge's face darkened with fury, and from the corner of his eye, Tyler saw Eleanor lean forward slightly, her expression attentive. "I see," Judge Reynolds said, his tone measured. "And what do you propose as a remedy for this deliberate decision?" "I would request a 60-day continuance, Your Honor, to allow for comprehensive historical assessments to be completed by an independent third party. During this time, I would also like to propose that representatives from Westridge Development meet with community leaders from East Side to discuss potential compromises that might better serve both parties' interests." Judge Reynolds studied Tyler for a long moment. "That's a reasonable proposal, Mr. Hamilton. However, given the circumstances, I believe additional oversight is warranted." He turned to Eleanor. "Professor Washington, given your expertise in this area, would you be willing to serve as a special master to oversee the historical assessment process and facilitate community discussions?" Eleanor inclined her head. "I would be honored, Your Honor." "Excellent. This court will reconvene in 60 days. In the meantime, I expect full cooperation from Westridge Development in this process." Judge Reynolds fixed Westridge with a stern look. "Is that understood?" Before Westridge could respond, Tyler answered firmly, "Yes, Your Honor, my client understands and will comply fully." As court adjourned, Westridge grabbed Tyler's arm. "What the hell was that? You just handed them everything they wanted." "No, Mr. Westridge. I just saved your case from being dismissed outright," Tyler replied evenly. "Judge Reynolds could have ruled against us immediately based on the incomplete filings. Instead, we have 60 days to find a workable solution." "This isn't over, Hamilton," Westridge hissed. "I'm calling Blackwell right now." As Westridge stormed out, Eleanor approached. "That took courage," she observed. Tyler loosened his tie slightly. "It may have cost me my job." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but you kept your integrity. In my experience, that's worth considerably more in the long run." She smiled slightly. "Besides, we have 60 days to find a solution that might satisfy everyone, even Richard Westridge. He doesn't realize it yet." Tyler nodded, feeling a curious mixture of professional dread and personal relief. Whatever came next, he knew he'd made the right choice. For the first time in his legal career, winning didn't seem like the only goal worth pursuing. The conference room at Blackwell and Reed fell silent as James Blackwell slammed his palm against the polished mahogany table. Tyler sat across from him, maintaining his composure despite the tension crackling in the air. "You had no authority to make that proposal in court," Blackwell said, his voice dangerously controlled. "Westridge is threatening to pull all his business, which, need I remind you, accounts for nearly 15% of our annual revenue." The case was about to be dismissed due to Westridge's deliberate misrepresentations. Tyler replied evenly. I salvaged what I could. By suggesting community meetings? By agreeing to let that professor oversee the process? Blackwell's face reddened. Your job was to win, not to play social justice advocate. My job was to represent our client effectively within the bounds of legal ethics, Tyler countered. Westridge submitted falsified documents to the court. Continuing to defend that position would have crossed an ethical line and destroyed our credibility with Judge Reynolds. Blackwell leaned back, studying Tyler with narrowed eyes. You've changed, Hamilton. 2 weeks ago, you would have found a way to spin this in our favor without blinking. Tyler didn't deny it. Maybe that's not something to regret. A tense silence stretched between them before Blackwell sighed heavily. You're off the Westridge case. Peterson will take over. Fine, Tyler said, surprising himself with how little the demotion stung. But Westridge needs to understand that any further misrepresentations will only damage his position. The path forward requires legitimate compromise, not shortcuts. I'll handle Westridge, Blackwell said dismissively. Meanwhile, I'm reassigning you to contract review for the next month. Consider it time to reflect on your priorities at this firm. Contract review, the legal equivalent of being sent to the corner with a dunce cap. It was tedious, entry-level work typically assigned to first-year associates, not rising stars like Tyler. The message was clear: step back in line or find another firm. As Tyler gathered his things to leave, Blackwell added, and Hamilton? Stay away from Eleanor Washington. That woman has always been trouble for developers in this city. She may have Judge Reynolds wrapped around her finger, but she has no place influencing Blackwell and Reed attorneys. Tyler paused at the door. Professor Washington has 45 years of legal experience and an unimpeachable reputation for integrity. We could learn something from her. He closed the door on Blackwell's thunderous expression, feeling a strange lightness despite the professional setback. For the first time in his career, Tyler had stood his ground on a matter of principle. Consequences be damned. It wasn't a sensation he was familiar with, but he found he rather liked it. The following week brought another surprise. Tyler was working late, slogging through mind-numbing contract clauses, when his office phone rang. Hamilton, he answered, expecting perhaps a paralegal with questions about one of his reassigned cases. Mr. Hamilton, this is Eleanor Washington. Her warm voice was instantly recognizable. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Tyler straightened in his chair. Not at all, Professor. What can I do for you? I understand you're no longer representing Westridge Development, she said. Mr. Peterson made that quite clear at our first assessment meeting yesterday. I've been reassigned, Tyler confirmed, keeping his tone neutral. So I gathered. A pity. Mr. Peterson seems far more interested in finding loopholes than solutions. She paused. I'm calling because I could use your perspective, Tyler. You've studied the case thoroughly and demonstrated a willingness to consider the community's interests alongside your clients. Would you be willing to join me for coffee tomorrow to discuss some ideas? Tyler hesitated. Blackwell had explicitly warned him to stay away from Eleanor. Meeting with her could further damage his already precarious standing at the firm. And yet, I'd be happy to, he heard himself say. Just to be clear, though, I can't officially represent any party in the case. Of course not, Eleanor agreed. This would be an informal consultation. Your insights could be valuable in finding a resolution that truly serves all parties. They arranged to meet at a downtown cafe the following afternoon. After hanging up, Tyler leaned back in his chair, contemplating the potential repercussions. If Blackwell found out, it could mean his job. But the prospect of contributing to a meaningful solution outweighed his concerns about firm politics. The next day, Eleanor was already seated when Tyler arrived at the cafe, several folders and a legal pad arranged neatly before her. She greeted him warmly, offering him a folder as he sat down. "These are the preliminary findings from our independent historical assessment," she explained as he scanned the documents. "The results are quite compelling. East Side contains architectural elements found nowhere else in the city, and the community's role in the civil rights movement alone would qualify several buildings for historical protection." Tyler nodded, absorbing the information. "Westridge won't be happy about this. His plans require demolishing most of these structures." "Indeed," Eleanor agreed, "which is why I'd like to propose an alternative approach." She slid another document across the table, a rough concept sketch showing a development that preserved key historical buildings while incorporating modern structures that complemented rather than erased the neighborhood's character. "This is interesting," Tyler said, studying the plans. "It maintains the cultural integrity of East Side while still allowing for significant development." "The community representatives were cautiously receptive when I showed them yesterday," Eleanor said. "But Westridge and Peterson dismissed it immediately as economically unfeasible." "Without even running the numbers?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Precisely why I wanted your perspective. You understand the financial aspects of development, but have shown sensitivity to the community's concerns as well." Tyler examined the proposal more carefully. "The profit margins would be smaller initially," he acknowledged, "but the unique character of the development could actually command premium prices in the long run. Plus, there are tax incentives for historical preservation that Westridge probably hasn't considered." For the next hour, they refined the concept, with Tyler identifying potential economic benefits and Eleanor ensuring the community's needs remained central to the plan. The result was a compelling compromise that offered something valuable to all parties. "This could work," Tyler said finally, surprised by his own enthusiasm. "If presented properly, Westridge might actually see the advantages." "That's where I hoped you might help," Eleanor said carefully. "Peterson is unlikely to present any compromise effectively. But you, even though you're no longer officially on the case, your opinion might carry weight with Blackwell, who could influence Westridge." Tyler grimaced. "I'm not exactly in Blackwell's good graces at the moment." "Perhaps not," Eleanor conceded. "But I've known James Blackwell for 30 years. He values profits above all, but he's not immune to solid economic arguments." She fixed Tyler with her perceptive gaze. "Think about it at least." As they prepared to leave, Tyler found himself asking, "Why did you call me, Eleanor? There must be other attorneys who could have provided this perspective." She smiled. "Because you showed something rare in that courtroom, Tyler. The courage to prioritize what's right over what's expedient. That quality is far more valuable than any legal expertise." She gathered her papers carefully. "Besides, I've always believed in investing in young lawyers who show promise. Just ask Marcus Reynolds." Over the next 2 weeks, Tyler found himself increasingly involved in the East Side compromise efforts, meeting with Eleanor during lunch breaks and after work. Despite his official removal from the case, he became an unofficial advisor, helping refine the economic arguments that might sway Westridge. The work energized him in a way that his regular cases never had. For the first time, he felt he was using his legal training to build something positive rather than simply to win. The community members he met through the process, including Delia from the cafe and several other East Side business owners, reinforced his growing conviction that the law should serve people, not just corporate interests. Inevitably, Blackwell noticed. Tyler was summoned to his office exactly 3 weeks after being removed from the Westridge case. "I hear you've been meeting with Eleanor Washington," Blackwell said without preamble. "Apparently, you didn't understand me when I told you to stay away from her." Tyler met his gaze steadily. "I understood perfectly. I chose to disregard that instruction." Blackwell's eyebrows shot up at the blunt response. "You're on thin ice, Hamilton." "Perhaps," Tyler acknowledged. but I believe I've helped develop a solution that could benefit everyone, including Westridge Development and this firm." He placed a folder on Blackwell's desk. "This compromise proposal preserves the most significant historical elements of East Side, while still allowing for substantial profitable development. It also includes tax advantages Westridge hasn't considered." Blackwell didn't touch the folder. "Peterson says Westridge won't compromise." "Peterson hasn't presented a viable compromise," Tyler countered. "This plan would allow you to salvage the firm's relationship with Westridge while resolving the case positively. Everyone wins." Blackwell eyed the folder with reluctant curiosity. "And if I refuse to even look at it?" Tyler took a deep breath. "Then I'll have to decide whether this is still the right firm for me." The statement hung in the air between them, charged with implication. Tyler hadn't planned to make such a declaration, but once spoken, he realized he meant it. Something fundamental had shifted in his professional priorities, and there was no going back. Blackwell stared at Tyler for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached for the folder and opened it. Tyler stood quietly as the senior partner scanned the contents, his frown deepening as he flipped through the pages. "You developed this with Washington?" Blackwell finally asked, looking up. "Yes, along with input from community representatives and architectural preservation experts." Blackwell tapped the financial projections. "These numbers look optimistic." "They're conservative, actually," Tyler countered. "We didn't include potential tourism revenue or the increased property values that typically accompany successful historical preservation projects. There are case studies from Charleston, Savannah, and New Orleans to support our estimates." Another long silence followed as Blackwell continued reviewing the documents. Tyler remained standing, outwardly calm despite the career-defining moment unfolding before him. "Sit down, Hamilton," Blackwell said finally. As Tyler took a seat, the senior partner leaned back in his chair. "You've put me in a difficult position. Westridge is a valuable client who expects us to execute his vision without question. That's how we've built this firm, giving clients what they want, not what we think they should want." "I understand that," Tyler said carefully. "But sometimes the best service we can provide is helping clients see opportunities they've overlooked. This compromise could actually be more profitable for Westridge in the long run, while avoiding years of costly litigation and negative publicity." Blackwell's lips thinned. "You sound like Eleanor Washington now." "I'll take that as a compliment," Tyler replied evenly. A surprised chuckle escaped Blackwell. "You really have changed, haven't you?" He tapped the folder thoughtfully. "All right, Hamilton. I'll present this to Westridge, but I make no promises about his reception. And let me be clear, this doesn't mean I approve of your recent professional evolution. The kind of law we practice at Blackwell & Reed requires absolute loyalty to client interests." "I haven't abandoned client loyalty," Tyler said. "I've just expanded my understanding of what truly serves their interests." Blackwell waved dismissively. "Save the philosophy for Washington. Be in my office tomorrow at 2 p.m. Westridge will be here, and you can present this proposal yourself." Tyler nodded, trying not to show his surprise at this unexpected opportunity. "Thank you. I'll be prepared." "You'd better be." "And Hamilton?" Blackwell fixed him with a stern look. "If Westridge rejects this and wants to proceed with his original plan, you will support that decision without reservation if you want to remain at this firm. Are we clear?" "Perfectly," Tyler replied, though they both knew it wasn't the simple assurance Blackwell wanted. The next day, Tyler arrived at Blackwell's office 15 minutes early, impeccably dressed and thoroughly prepared. Eleanor had helped him anticipate every possible objection Westridge might raise, and they had developed comprehensive responses for each. Westridge arrived precisely at 2 p.m., his expensive suit and imperious manner unchanged. His eyes narrowed when he saw Tyler. "I thought Peterson was handling my case now." "He is," Blackwell assured him smoothly. "But Hamilton has developed an alternative approach that I believe merits consideration. It could potentially resolve the legal challenges while still achieving your development goals." "I'm not interested in compromising with those community activists," Westridge stated flatly. "Mr. Westridge," Tyler began, "what I'm proposing isn't a compromise in the sense of settling for less. It's an enhanced strategy that could actually increase your return on investment while resolving the legal obstacles you're currently facing." Westridge's expression remained skeptical, but he took a seat. "You have 15 minutes. Tyler launched into his presentation with focused precision. He outlined the architectural and historical significance of key East Side buildings, presented the modified development plan that incorporated these structures, and detailed the financial advantages, including tax incentives, premium pricing potential, and positive publicity. "The current legal challenges could delay your project for years," Tyler explained, showing a timeline comparison. "This approach could have you breaking ground within 6 months, with strong community support rather than ongoing opposition." Westridge interrupted frequently with pointed questions, which Tyler answered calmly and thoroughly. As the presentation continued, the developer's aggressive posture gradually relaxed, and he began to engage more thoughtfully with the material. "These tax credits," he said, pointing to a section of the financial analysis. "They're substantial." "Yes," Tyler confirmed. "The federal historic rehabilitation tax credit alone would cover 20% of qualified rehabilitation expenses. Combined with state incentives and the proposed community investment fund, the total tax benefits could offset nearly 30% of your construction costs." By the end of the hour, well past Westridge's initial 15-minute limit, the developer was leaning forward, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and potential partnerships. "I want my team to review these numbers," he said finally, "and I'll need to walk the site again with these specific buildings in mind." "Of course," Tyler agreed. "Professor Washington has offered to arrange a tour with preservation experts who can point out the historically significant elements and discuss integration possibilities." Westridge's eyebrows shot up. "Eleanor Washington? The same woman who's been fighting my development plans for months?" "The same," Tyler confirmed. "She's been instrumental in developing this compromise approach. Her expertise in historical preservation law is unparalleled, and she has deep connections in the community. Having her support would be invaluable in moving forward smoothly." Westridge glanced at Blackwell, who remained carefully neutral. "You're suggesting I work with someone who's been my primary opposition?" "I'm suggesting that her opposition stemmed from legitimate concerns that this new approach addresses," Tyler clarified. "Professor Washington isn't against development per se. She's against development that erases history and displaces communities. This plan respects both while still allowing for significant profit." After Westridge left, promising to consider the proposal and respond within the week, Blackwell fixed Tyler with an appraising look. "That was impressive, Hamilton. You may have actually swayed him." "The proposal speaks for itself," Tyler replied modestly. "It genuinely offers advantages his original plan doesn't." "Perhaps," Blackwell conceded. "But don't think this changes the fundamentals of how we operate at this firm. If Westridge ultimately rejects this approach, we'll pursue his preferred strategy with full vigor." Tyler nodded, though they both knew a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. His perspective on legal practice had fundamentally shifted, and that transformation would inevitably affect his future at Blackwell & Reed, regardless of Westridge's decision. The following afternoon, Judge Reynolds requested a status update from all parties. Tyler attended out of personal interest, though Peterson officially represented Westridge Development. Eleanor nodded to Tyler from her customary front row seat as he entered the courtroom. After Peterson and Ms. Chen provided brief updates on the historical assessment process, Judge Reynolds addressed Eleanor directly. "Professor Washington, as special master, what is your assessment of the progress thus far?" Eleanor rose with her characteristic grace. "There have been promising developments, Your Honor. The independent historical assessment has confirmed the significant cultural and architectural value of several East Side structures. More importantly, we've developed a potential compromise that would preserve these key buildings while still allowing for substantial development." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A compromise? That's unexpected but welcome news. Has Westridge Development indicated receptiveness to this approach?" Before Eleanor could respond, Peterson interjected. "Your Honor, my client is reviewing various options but has made no commitments regarding any compromise proposal." "I see," Judge Reynolds said, his gaze shifting to Tyler briefly before returning to Peterson. "Well, I encourage all parties to pursue good faith negotiations. This court would look favorably upon a resolution that respects both property rights and historical preservation concerns." After the hearing, Eleanor intercepted Tyler in the courthouse corridor. "Westridge seemed genuinely interested in our proposal when I spoke with him this morning," she said quietly. "He's scheduled a site visit for tomorrow." Tyler's eyebrows rose in surprise. "He contacted you directly?" "Indeed. Said he wanted to see East Side through new eyes, as he put it." Her expression was cautiously optimistic. "It seems your presentation made quite an impression." "Our presentation," Tyler corrected. "This was a team effort." Eleanor smiled. "Speaking of which, Judge Reynolds has invited us both to dinner this evening. He's quite intrigued by our collaborative approach to this case." Tyler hesitated, aware that dining with the presiding judge and the court-appointed special master might raise eyebrows, particularly given his firm's continued representation of Westridge. Yet the opportunity to gain further insights from both Eleanor and Judge Reynolds was too valuable to pass up. "I'd be honored," he said finally, "though I should clarify that I'm no longer officially representing any party in this matter." "All the more reason your perspective would be valuable," Eleanor replied. "Marcus appreciates attorneys who can think beyond adversarial positions to find true resolution. It's a quality he believes the legal profession sorely lacks these days." As they parted, Tyler reflected on how dramatically his professional life had changed in just a few weeks. From single-mindedly pursuing victory for his client to collaboratively seeking solutions that served multiple interests, it was a transformation he couldn't have imagined at the start of the Westridge case. Yet for all the professional uncertainty this evolution had created, Tyler felt a clarity of purpose that had previously eluded him. Whatever came next, whether Westridge accepted the compromise, whether his future lay at Blackwell and Reed or elsewhere, he was becoming the kind of attorney he could respect. And that, he was beginning to understand, mattered more than partnership tracks or prestigious client rosters. Judge Reynolds lived in a stately Victorian home in the city's historic Garden District, a neighborhood that had once faced similar development pressures to those now threatening East Side. As Tyler climbed the steps to the wraparound porch, he admired the meticulous restoration work that had preserved the home's 19th-century character while incorporating modern amenities. Eleanor arrived just as he reached the door. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she remarked, following his gaze. "Marcus and Ellen saved this house from demolition 20 years ago. The developer wanted to build a parking structure." The door opened before Tyler could respond, revealing a tall, distinguished man whose resemblance to Judge Reynolds was unmistakable, though his manner was more relaxed than the judge's courtroom persona. "Eleanor?" he greeted warmly, embracing her before turning to Tyler. "And you must be Mr. Hamilton. Welcome to our home." "Thank you for having me, Judge Reynolds," Tyler replied, extending his hand. "Marcus, please. We're not in court now." His handshake was firm and genuine. "Come in, both of you. Ellen is just finishing up in the kitchen." They followed him through a foyer decorated with family photographs and framed legal documents, including, Tyler noted with interest, Eleanor's signed oath of admission to the Supreme Court bar. The dining room was elegant but comfortable, with a table set for four beneath a vintage chandelier. Ellen Reynolds, a warm-faced woman with silver-streaked dark hair, greeted them with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to entertaining distinguished guests. "Eleanor, wonderful to see you," she said, embracing the older woman before turning to Tyler. "And you must be the young attorney who's been giving my husband something to think about. He says that's a rare occurrence these days." Conversation flowed easily throughout dinner, touching on legal matters but also literature, music, and local history. Tyler found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did in professional settings, drawn into discussions that ranged far beyond legal strategy. Over dessert, Ellen's homemade peach cobbler, the conversation turned to Eleanor and Marcus's long professional relationship. "Eleanor was the first black woman to teach at Georgetown Law when I was a student there," Marcus explained. "Most of the faculty treated her as if she were some kind of diversity experiment, but students knew better. Her constitutional law course had a waiting list a mile long." "You're exaggerating," Eleanor demurred, though her eyes twinkled with pleasure. "Not at all," Marcus insisted. "You challenged us to think beyond precedent, to consider the human impact of legal decisions. It changed my entire approach to law." "Is that why you became a judge?" Tyler asked. "To focus on the human element?" Marcus considered this. "Partly. I'd spent 10 years in corporate practice, making good money but feeling increasingly hollow. When Eleanor encouraged me to apply for a judicial appointment, I realized it was a chance to practice law in a way that aligned with my deeper values." "Marcus was always meant for the bench," Eleanor added. "He has that rare combination of intellectual rigor and genuine compassion." "High praise from my toughest critic," Marcus smiled. "Eleanor never hesitates to tell me when she thinks I've missed the mark in a ruling." "Only because I know you value truth over flattery," she replied warmly. As Tyler observed their easy rapport, he realized he was witnessing something rare, a mentor-mentee relationship that had evolved into a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. It was miles away from the competitive, often cutthroat relationships that characterized Blackwell and Reed. Later, as they moved to the living room for coffee, Marcus addressed Tyler directly. "Eleanor tells me you've had something of an epiphany in the Westridge case." Tyler considered his response carefully. "I've had cause to reconsider some of my assumptions about what it means to practice law effectively," he acknowledged. "The East Side community deserves consideration that goes beyond legal technicalities. And your firm? How have they responded to this evolution in your thinking?" "With mixed feelings," Tyler admitted. "They value winning cases above all else. Finding balanced solutions isn't really their priority." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Many attorneys never question that paradigm throughout their entire careers. The fact that you're doing so now speaks well of you." "I had good cause to reconsider," Tyler replied, glancing at Eleanor. "Some perspectives are too compelling to ignore once you've truly heard them." The evening concluded with promises to stay in touch, regardless of the Westridge case's outcome. As they prepared to leave, Marcus pulled a book from his library and handed it to Tyler. "This might interest you," he said. "It's Eleanor's doctoral dissertation on the intersection of property law and civil rights. Changed how I think about development cases permanently." Tyler accepted the book with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I look forward to reading it." Outside, as they waited for their respective cars, Eleanor regarded Tyler thoughtfully. "You made quite an impression on Marcus tonight." "He's not what I expected," Tyler admitted. "In court, he's so formal, reserved. That's the robe talking. The real Marcus Reynolds cares deeply about justice in its truest sense." She paused. He's also on the short list for a federal appellate appointment next year. Tyler raised his eyebrows. That's impressive. Indeed. And he'll remember attorneys who demonstrate integrity and thoughtfulness. Her meaning was clear. Connections like these could be valuable for Tyler's future, perhaps in ways that extended beyond Blackwell and Reed. The next morning, Tyler met Eleanor and Westridge at East Side for the promised site visit. Delia from the cafe had organized a small group of community representatives to guide them through the neighborhood, highlighting its historical and cultural significance. To Tyler's surprise, Westridge listened attentively as residents pointed out architectural details, shared family histories, and explained the neighborhood's role in the civil rights movement. The developer asked thoughtful questions and took notes, his previous dismissiveness notably absent. This craftsmanship is remarkable, Westridge observed, examining the intricate woodwork on a century-old storefront. You don't see this quality in modern construction. My great-grandfather built this with hand tools, the current owner explained proudly. He wasn't allowed to join the Carpenters Union because of his race, but he'd trained with master craftsmen in New Orleans. As they continued the tour, Tyler noticed Westridge's expression growing increasingly thoughtful. The developer was seeing the neighborhood with new eyes, not just as real estate to be acquired, but as a living community with a rich heritage. After lunch at Delia's cafe, where Westridge praised the food enthusiastically, he pulled Tyler and Eleanor aside. "I've been thinking about your proposal," he said, his tone more measured than Tyler had ever heard it. "The preservation elements would add complexity to the project, but I can see potential benefits I hadn't considered before." "Such as?" Eleanor prompted. "Marketing, for one thing. Luxury living in a historic district has a certain appeal that another generic development doesn't, and these tax incentives are substantial." He gestured around them. "Plus, there's something about the character of this place. It tells a story that people might pay a premium to be part of." Tyler exchanged a glance with Eleanor, both carefully containing their optimism. "I'd like my architects to work with your preservation experts," Westridge continued. "See if we can develop detailed plans that incorporate these key buildings while still meeting our profit targets." "That's an excellent next step," Eleanor agreed. "I can arrange those meetings as early as next week." As they parted ways, Westridge shook Tyler's hand with unexpected warmth. "You were right to push for this approach, Hamilton. Sometimes we developers get so focused on clearing the slate that we miss opportunities right in front of us." When Tyler reported this progress to Blackwell later that day, the senior partner seemed genuinely surprised. "Westridge actually wants to preserve parts of the neighborhood? That's unexpected." "The compromise makes business sense," Tyler explained. "It's not charity. It's smart development that respects history while still generating substantial profit." Blackwell studied him for a moment. "You really believe in this, don't you?" "I do," Tyler acknowledged. "Because it's the right approach legally, financially, and ethically. Ethics don't pay the bills, Hamilton." "With respect, sir, this approach will pay the bills quite handsomely, while also allowing all of us to sleep better at night." Blackwell's expression was unreadable. "You've certainly changed your tune since joining this firm. I'm not yet sure if that's for better or worse." He sighed. "Continue working with Westridge on this compromise if that's what he wants. Peterson will handle the formal legal filings, but you can take point on the development strategy." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was tacit permission to continue on the path Tyler had chosen. As he left Blackwell's office, Tyler realized that regardless of how the case ultimately resolved, he had already won a more personal victory, finding his authentic voice as an attorney who valued justice as much as success. Over the next few weeks, the compromise plan for East Side took shape through collaborative sessions between Westridge's architects, preservation experts, and community representatives. Tyler attended each meeting, often serving as translator between the different perspectives, helping stakeholders find common ground when conflicts arose. The East Side Community Center, a converted church that had hosted civil rights meetings in the 1960s, became their regular meeting place. Its stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across architectural drawings and financial projections as they worked. Eleanor presided over these sessions with a deft touch, allowing all voices to be heard while keeping discussions productive. During one particularly tense meeting, Westridge's lead architect and a community historian clashed over the fate of an old theater. "The structural issues make preservation prohibitively expensive," the architect insisted, pointing to stress fractures in the foundation diagrams. "We'd essentially be rebuilding it from scratch." "That theater was the only place black residents could see films during segregation," the historian countered. "It's irreplaceable cultural heritage." Tyler watched Westridge's expression harden, a familiar precursor to the developer dismissing community concerns in favor of financial considerations. Before Westridge could speak, Tyler intervened. "What if we preserved the facade and lobby with their original details, but redesigned the interior as a modern multi-purpose space?" he suggested. "We could incorporate historical exhibits about the theater's significance, maybe even reserve screening space for community film events." Both parties paused, considering. "The facade is the most architecturally significant element," the historian acknowledged reluctantly. "And maintaining just that portion would reduce structural remediation costs by 60%, the architect calculated. Westridge nodded slowly. "We could market it as a historic venue with modern amenities. That actually has commercial appeal." Eleanor caught Tyler's eye across the table, her approving smile warming him more than any compliment from Blackwell ever had. Such moments of creative compromise characterized the process, gradually transforming Westridge's original plan for wholesale demolition into an integrated design that honored East Side's history while allowing for thoughtful development. The revised project would preserve key buildings, incorporate architectural elements that reflected the neighborhood's character, create affordable housing alongside luxury units, and establish a community trust fund supported by a percentage of commercial revenues. Not everyone was pleased with these developments. Peterson, still officially lead counsel on the case, made his skepticism clear during status meetings at Blackwell and Reed. "All these concessions are eroding the profit margin," he argued during one such meeting. "Westridge is getting soft, letting sentiment override business sense." "The numbers say otherwise," Tyler countered, presenting the updated financial projections. "Tax incentives for historical preservation offset most additional costs, and the unique character of the development allows for premium pricing on the luxury units. The projected ROI is actually higher than the original plan, just distributed differently across the project timeline." Peterson remained unconvinced, but Blackwell studied the figures with grudging interest. "These tax benefits are substantial," he admitted, "and having Eleanor Washington's support rather than opposition does simplify the approval process." "Exactly," Tyler agreed. "Plus, the positive press has already improved Westridge Development's public image. They've received inquiries about similar projects in other cities where historical preservation is a concern." This information caught Blackwell's attention. "Other cities? Westridge is considering this approach elsewhere?" "He's mentioned exploratory discussions in Charleston and Philadelphia," Tyler confirmed, recognizing the calculation in Blackwell's eyes, potential new business opportunities beyond the current project. As the court-mandated 60-day period neared its conclusion, Judge Reynolds called a final status conference. The courtroom was more crowded than usual, with East Side residents, preservationists, and local media all in attendance. Eleanor presented the compromise plan first, outlining its key elements and the collaborative process that had produced it. Ms. Chen, the original plaintiff's attorney, followed by expressing her client's tentative support, contingent on certain implementation guarantees. When Peterson rose to present Westridge's position, Tyler held his breath. Despite the developer's apparent enthusiasm for the compromise, Peterson had remained resistant, and Tyler knew the attorney could potentially derail progress if he chose to emphasize remaining points of contention rather than areas of agreement. To Tyler's relief, Peterson stuck to the script they'd prepared, confirming Westridge Development's commitment to the revised plan while requesting minor adjustments to the implementation timeline. Judge Reynolds listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Eleanor, who sat in her customary front-row seat, her expression serene. When all parties had spoken, he addressed the courtroom. "I want to commend everyone involved for their remarkable progress," he began. "What began as an adversarial dispute has evolved into a collaborative effort that appears to serve all parties' legitimate interests." His gaze moved from Eleanor to Tyler. "This kind of resolution represents the highest ideal of our legal system, not merely adjudicating conflicts, but helping create solutions that strengthen communities." He ordered a 30-day period for finalizing technical details, with Eleanor continuing as special master to oversee the process. Assuming no unforeseen complications, the court anticipates approving the final agreement at that time. As the crowd dispersed after adjournment, Tyler found himself surrounded by East Side residents offering thanks and handshakes. Delia from the cafe hugged him impulsively, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My grandfather would be so proud to see his cafe preserved," she told him. "Thank you for helping make that happen." Westridge approached next, looking more relaxed than Tyler had ever seen him. "Nice work, Hamilton," he said, clapping Tyler on the shoulder. "I was skeptical at first, but this compromise is actually better than my original concept. The historical elements give the whole development a distinctive character that will set it apart in the market." "I'm glad you see it that way," Tyler replied sincerely. "In fact," Westridge continued, "I'd like you to stay involved as we move forward. Help us navigate the preservation requirements and community engagement aspects. Blackwell mentioned you might be interested in continuing to work with us on similar projects in other cities." Tyler blinked in surprise. Blackwell had said that? "I'd certainly be interested in discussing those possibilities," he managed. After Westridge departed, Eleanor made her way to Tyler's side. "Quite a transformation," she observed, "both in the project and in Richard Westridge himself." "And in me," Tyler acknowledged. "This case has changed how I think about practicing law." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "Have you considered what that means for your future at Blackwell and Reed? From what I understand, their approach doesn't typically prioritize the kind of balanced advocacy you've demonstrated here." "I've been thinking about that," Tyler admitted. "I'm not sure I fit there anymore, but I'm not certain what alternatives might look like." "Perhaps we should discuss that," Eleanor suggested. "I know several firms with practice areas focused on collaborative development and community-centered real estate work. And there's always the possibility of public interest law. The Legal Aid Society is always looking for talented attorneys with corporate experience." The idea of leaving the prestigious partnership track at Blackwell and Reed would have been unthinkable to Tyler just months ago. Now he found himself genuinely curious about these alternatives. "I'd appreciate that guidance," he said, "though I should probably see this case through to completion first." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "Speaking of which, I'm hosting a small dinner next week to celebrate our progress. Judge Reynolds will be there, along with some of the community leaders and preservation experts who've been instrumental in the process. I'd be delighted if you could join us." As Tyler accepted the invitation, he realized how dramatically his professional network had expanded beyond the narrow confines of corporate law. These new connections, with community advocates, preservationists, and jurists like Judge Reynolds, offered pathways he'd never previously considered. Later that afternoon, Blackwell called Tyler into his office. "Westridge seems quite taken with this compromise approach," the senior partner observed. He mentioned potential projects in other cities where similar issues might arise. "Yes, he expressed interest in continuing our working relationship," Tyler confirmed. "Our working relationship," Blackwell repeated, emphasizing the plural. "Let me be clear, Hamilton. If Westridge wants to pursue this preservation-minded development approach elsewhere, Blackwell and Reed will represent him. Whether you're part of that representation depends entirely on your commitment to this firm's priorities moving forward." The implicit ultimatum was clear. Tyler could continue working with Westridge, but only within the firm's traditional framework, client-centered advocacy without the community-minded approach he'd come to value. "I understand," Tyler replied neutrally, unwilling to commit himself either way just yet. Blackwell seemed satisfied with this response. "Good. You've shown impressive initiative with this case, Hamilton. Don't let newfound idealism derail your career just as it's gaining momentum." As Tyler left the office, he wondered if Blackwell truly understood that his definition of career momentum had fundamentally changed. Success now meant something more complex and ultimately more satisfying than simply climbing the partnership ladder. What exact form that would take remained to be seen, but Tyler felt a growing certainty that his professional future would be defined by the values he'd discovered through his work with Eleanor and the East Side community. Eleanor's home, a beautifully restored Victorian in a quiet neighborhood adjacent to East Side, was filled with warm conversation and laughter. Tyler stood by the fireplace, nursing a glass of wine and observing the diverse group of professionals Eleanor had gathered to celebrate their progress on the East Side project. Judge Reynolds and his wife chatted with Delia from the cafe. Ms. Chen, the Preservation Society's attorney, discussed architectural details with Westridge's lead architect. Community leaders mingled with city officials and preservation experts. The atmosphere was collaborative and genuinely warm, worlds away from the networking events Tyler was accustomed to at Blackwell and Reed, where interactions were measured by their potential value to the firm. "Quite a gathering, isn't it?" The voice belonged to a woman Tyler hadn't met yet, perhaps 40, with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. "It is," he agreed, turning to introduce himself. "Tyler Hamilton." "Gabriela Morales," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I lead the Urban Justice Center's Community Development Project." Tyler recognized the name, a well-respected nonprofit legal organization known for its innovative work on equitable development. "I've read about your work preventing displacement in the Riverside Redevelopment Project. Very impressive." Gabriela looked pleasantly surprised. "Not many corporate attorneys follow our cases. I'm developing broader interests lately," Tyler admitted. "So Eleanor mentioned," Gabriela said with a knowing smile. "She speaks very highly of you. Says you've shown remarkable growth during the East Side case." Before Tyler could respond, Eleanor appeared beside them. "I see you two have found each other," she observed, her expression suggesting this was no coincidence. "Gabriela, did you tell Tyler about the position you're looking to fill?" Gabriela laughed. "I was getting there, Eleanor. You're not very subtle." Tyler looked between them questioningly. "We're expanding our community development project," Gabriela explained. "Looking for an attorney with corporate experience who can speak the language of developers while advocating for community interests. Someone who can build bridges rather than walls." She gave Tyler an appraising look. "Eleanor suggested you might be interested in exploring opportunities beyond traditional corporate practice." Yes, I've been considering my options," Tyler acknowledged, caught off guard by this unexpected opening. "No pressure," Gabriela assured him. "But if you'd like to learn more, I'd be happy to meet for coffee next week. We can't match Blackwell and Reed's salary, of course, but we offer litigation experience, significant responsibility from day one, and the knowledge that your work directly improves people's lives. As the evening progressed, Tyler found himself introduced to several other attorneys working in community development, historical preservation, and public interest law. Each conversation opened windows onto career paths he'd never seriously considered before, pathways that aligned with his evolving values in ways his current position couldn't. Near the end of the evening, he found himself on Eleanor's porch with Judge Reynolds, both taking a moment of quiet away from the festivities. "Eleanor's not being very subtle about introducing you to alternative career opportunities," the judge observed with amusement. Tyler smiled. "No, she isn't. That's Eleanor. Once she believes in someone's potential, she becomes quite invested in their future." Reynolds swirled the bourbon in his glass thoughtfully. "She did the same for me when I was considering leaving corporate practice for the bench. Best career advice I ever received." "Did you ever regret the change?" Tyler asked. "Walking away from the prestige and financial rewards of private practice?" Reynolds considered the question seriously. "There were moments early on when I questioned the decision, particularly when I was paying my children's college tuition on a judge's salary." He smiled ruefully. "But regret? No. The work I do matters in ways that corporate practice never did for me. That compensation runs deeper than money." When Tyler returned to his apartment that night, his mind was buzzing with possibilities he'd never before considered. The Urban Justice Center position would mean a significant pay cut, and stepping off the partnership track he'd worked so hard to ascend. Yet it also offered purpose, autonomy, and alignment with values that had become increasingly important to him. The next morning, Blackwell summoned Tyler to his office. The senior partner's expression was grave as Tyler took a seat. "Peterson tells me you were at Eleanor Washington's home last night, networking with nonprofit attorneys," Blackwell began without preamble. "Is this true?" Tyler felt a flash of irritation at Peterson's monitoring of his personal activities, but kept his tone neutral. "Yes. Professor Washington hosted a gathering to celebrate our progress on the East Side Compromise. And you were discussing career opportunities outside this firm? With the Urban Justice Center, I believe?" Tyler straightened in his chair. "I had several conversations about various legal career paths. Nothing has been decided." Blackwell leaned forward. "Let me be clear, Hamilton. You've been given exceptional opportunities at this firm because we recognized your potential. We've invested in your development with the expectation that you'd become a valued partner here. If you're exploring other options, I need to know now." "I'm considering all aspects of my professional future," Tyler replied carefully. "The East Side case has opened my eyes to different ways of practicing law." "Different ways," Blackwell repeated with thinly veiled disdain. "Public interest work is admirable, I suppose, but it's not the caliber of practice we do here. You'd be wasting your talents and throwing away a very promising future." "With respect, sir, I'm not sure I agree with that assessment." Blackwell's expression hardened. "I need to know where your loyalties lie, Hamilton. Westridge wants to move forward with projects in other cities, and he's specifically requested your involvement. I need to assure him you're committed to representing his interests according to this firm's standards." The implicit ultimatum was clear. Tyler had a choice to make, and Blackwell wanted an answer now. "I'd like some time to consider my options," Tyler said finally. "The East Side case has another 3 weeks before final approval. I'll give you my decision before then." Blackwell didn't bother to hide his displeasure. "Don't take too long. Opportunities like the Westridge portfolio don't come along every day, and there are plenty of attorneys at this firm who would jump at the chance you seem to be wavering on." The following weeks brought the East Side project to its conclusion. The final agreement was even stronger than the initial compromise, with additional protections for community interests and clearer guidelines for integrating historical elements into the new development. Throughout the process, Tyler found himself increasingly drawn to the community-centered approach that Eleanor had championed from the beginning. 2 days before the final court approval, Tyler met Gabriela Morales for coffee to discuss the Urban Justice Center position in more detail. "We'd want you to lead our equitable development initiative," she explained. "Working with communities facing development pressure to negotiate agreements that preserve neighborhood character while allowing for necessary growth. The East Side model you helped create is exactly the kind of approach we want to replicate elsewhere." "It sounds meaningful," Tyler acknowledged. "But it's a significant change from corporate practice." "It is," Gabriela agreed. "But from what Eleanor tells me, you've already undergone the most important transition, shifting your perspective on what law can and should accomplish. The rest is just logistics." Later that day, Tyler sat in his office at Blackwell & Reed, weighing his options. On his desk lay 2 documents: a partnership track projection Blackwell had provided, showing Tyler's potential earnings and advancement over the next decade, and Gabriela's formal offer letter from the Urban Justice Center. The salary difference was substantial. He'd be making less than half his current compensation. But the UJC position offered litigation experience, community impact, and work that aligned with his evolving values in ways Blackwell & Reed never could. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Peterson, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. "Hamilton, I thought you should know. Blackwell is meeting with Westridge right now. They're discussing the other city projects, and Blackwell is positioning me to take the lead." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Before I've even given my decision?" Peterson shrugged. "Blackwell doesn't like uncertainty. He's hedging his bets." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake if you leave. This is one of the best firms in the city." "It is excellent at what it does," Tyler agreed. "I'm just not sure that what it does is what I want to do anymore." After Peterson left, Tyler made one final visit to East Side, walking the streets that had become surprisingly familiar over the past weeks. He stopped at Delia's Cafe, where a small celebration was underway in anticipation of the next day's final court approval. "There he is," Delia called as he entered. "One of our heroes." Tyler accepted the warm greetings with genuine pleasure, touched by the community's embracing of him. As he sipped Delia's peach tea, he gazed around at the cafe that would now be preserved as part of the revised development plan. Eleanor found him there, taking a seat across from him with her customary grace. "You look contemplative," she observed. "I'm making a difficult decision," he admitted. She nodded understandingly. "The hardest choices are often between a good option and a better one. The question is, better by whose standards?" "That's exactly it," Tyler agreed. "By the standards I had when I joined Blackwell & Reed, staying would be the obvious choice. But by the standards I've developed through this case..." He trailed off. "You're not the same young attorney who dismissed me in that courtroom months ago," Eleanor said gently. "That's something to celebrate, not fear." Tyler smiled at the memory of their first encounter. How arrogantly he'd dismissed her advice. How certain he'd been of his path. "I've been thinking about something you said that day. That I was at the wrong table. It seems particularly relevant now." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes the most important wisdom arrives before we're ready to hear it." She rose to leave. "Whatever you decide, Tyler, know that you've already succeeded in the ways that truly matter. You've helped create something meaningful here that will benefit generations to come." As the sun set over East Side, casting long shadows across streets that would now remain intact thanks to their collective efforts, Tyler found his decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. The path forward wasn't without risks or sacrifices, but for the first time in his career, he felt he was choosing a table that truly belonged to him. The final approval hearing for the East Side Compromise was standing room only. Community members filled the benches, Local media clustered near the walls, and even attorneys from other firms came to witness the resolution of what had become a closely watched case in development law circles. Tyler sat beside Peterson at the defense table, while Westridge sat directly behind them, unusually subdued compared to his typically dominant presence. Eleanor, in her role as special master, presented the final agreement to Judge Reynolds. Her clear voice carried through the courtroom as she outlined the key provisions: the preservation of historically significant buildings, the integration of architectural elements that honored the neighborhood's character, affordable housing requirements, local business support, and the community benefit fund that would ensure East Side residents shared in the development's success. This agreement represents a true balance of interests, Eleanor concluded. It allows for necessary development while preserving the cultural and historical fabric that makes East Side unique. Most importantly, it was created through genuine collaboration rather than adversarial positioning. Judge Reynolds nodded approvingly. Does any party wish to raise concerns before the court grants final approval? Tyler glanced at Westridge, who shook his head slightly. Peterson rose briefly to confirm the developer's full support for the agreement as presented. Very well, Judge Reynolds said, satisfaction evident in his voice. This court hereby approves the East Side Development Agreement as presented. Furthermore, I wish to commend all parties for their exemplary work in finding common ground where none seemed possible at the outset. His gaze moved deliberately from Eleanor to Tyler. This case demonstrates the best of what our legal system can achieve when attorneys approach their work with creativity, integrity, and a genuine commitment to justice. As the crowd dispersed after adjournment, Tyler found himself surrounded by well-wishers from the East Side community. An elderly man grasped his hand with surprising strength. My family has lived here for 4 generations, he said, his eyes bright with emotion. Thanks to you, we'll see a 5th. Delia hugged him warmly. The cafe's hosting a celebration tonight. You'd better be there. Tyler promised he would, then made his way through the crowd to where Eleanor stood speaking with Judge Reynolds. The judge shook Tyler's hand firmly. Impressive work, counselor. Whatever comes next in your career, remember what you accomplished here. Eleanor smiled knowingly but said nothing as the judge moved away. Have you made your decision? She asked quietly. I have, Tyler confirmed. I'm meeting with Blackwell at noon. Her eyes searched his face. And are you at peace with your choice? Tyler nodded, surprised to find it was true. Completely. James Blackwell was on a call when Tyler entered his office, but he quickly ended it and gestured for Tyler to sit. Hamilton, I assume you're here with your decision regarding the Westridge portfolio. In a manner of speaking, yes. Tyler placed an envelope on Blackwell's desk. This is my resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. Blackwell's expression hardened, though he didn't look entirely surprised. The Urban Justice Center? Yes, I'll be leading their Equitable Development Initiative, focusing on cases similar to East Side. At less than half your current salary, Blackwell noted, his tone suggesting this proved Tyler's foolishness. With twice the meaning, Tyler countered calmly. Blackwell leaned back in his chair, studying Tyler with a mixture of disappointment and reluctant respect. You know, I had high hopes for you, Hamilton. You have exceptional legal skills. And I'll continue using them, just in a different context. Washington has filled your head with idealism, Blackwell said dismissively. The real world doesn't work that way. Tyler smiled slightly. The East Side Agreement suggests otherwise. Everyone got something valuable from that compromise, including Westridge, who now has a more distinctive and potentially more profitable development than his original concept. And you think you'll replicate that success case after case? Blackwell's skepticism was evident. That kind of outcome is the exception, not the rule. Perhaps it's exceptional because too few attorneys are willing to put in the work to find collaborative solutions, Tyler suggested. I'd like to change that. Blackwell picked up the resignation letter, scanning it briefly before setting it aside. Well, you've certainly made up your mind. I won't try to change it, but remember, Hamilton, the door won't necessarily remain open if you decide public interest work isn't as fulfilling as you imagined. Tyler rose to leave. I appreciate everything I've learned at Blackwell and Reed. It's provided an excellent foundation for what comes next. As he turned to go, Blackwell added, For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake, but I respect your conviction in making it. Coming from Blackwell, this was high praise indeed. Tyler nodded his acknowledgement before closing the door behind him. 3 years later. Tyler adjusted his tie as he waited outside courtroom 3C. The hallway buzzed with attorneys and clients, the familiar energy of the courthouse washing over him. 3 years at the Urban Justice Center had transformed his legal practice in ways he could never have anticipated, developing expertise in community benefits agreements, affordable housing preservation, and equitable development frameworks that were now being adopted in cities across the country. Today he was representing a neighborhood association in Northridge, using many of the same strategies that had proved successful in East Side. The judge assigned to the case was new to him, Judge Eliza Hernandez, recently appointed to the bench after a distinguished career in civil rights law. Nervous? The familiar voice made Tyler turn with a smile. Eleanor Washington approached, her cane tapping gently against the marble floor. Eleanor, what brings you here? Judge Hernandez was one of my students at Georgetown, she explained. I try to attend when one of my former protégés takes the bench for an important case. She studied him with warm approval. You look well, Tyler. The Urban Justice Center agrees with you. It does, he confirmed. The work is challenging and meaningful in ways I never experienced in corporate practice. And the East Side model has proven quite influential, I understand. Tyler nodded. We've implemented similar agreements in 6 neighborhoods now. Developers are actually starting to approach us proactively, seeing the benefits of community collaboration rather than opposition. I knew you'd find your path, Eleanor said with satisfaction. How does it feel, looking back on that first day in court when you dismissed me so thoroughly? Tyler laughed, shaking his head at the memory. Like looking at a different person. I was so certain of everything then, so sure that winning was all that mattered. And now? Now I understand that how you win matters just as much as whether you win. He gestured toward the courtroom. Would you like to observe today's hearing? We're using the community benefits framework you helped pioneer. I'd be delighted, Eleanor agreed. But first, I have something for you. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small, wrapped package. A belated office warming gift. Tyler unwrapped it carefully to find a polished silver paperweight engraved with words he recognized immediately. The law isn't just about statutes and precedents. It's about people, their lives, their dreams, their dignity. My words from our dinner at Delia's Cafe, Eleanor confirmed. I thought you might want a daily reminder of where this journey began. Tyler's fingers traced the engraved letters, surprisingly moved by the gesture. I've never forgotten that conversation. It changed everything for me. You were ready to hear it, Eleanor said simply. Some never are. They were interrupted by the bailiff calling Tyler's case. As they entered the courtroom together, Tyler noticed Judge Hernandez's warm smile of recognition when she spotted Eleanor in the gallery. Another one of your mentees? Eleanor asked quietly, nodding toward Tyler's opposing counsel, a young woman arranging documents at the other table. Not yet, Tyler replied with a smile, but the case might present some opportunities to share perspective, if she's open to it. Eleanor's eyes twinkled with approval. The best legacies are the ones we pass forward, As court was called to session, Tyler glanced back at Eleanor, remembering their first encounter in this very courtroom. How he'd dismissed her advice, how certain he'd been of his path. That arrogant young attorney could never have imagined how a brief interaction with an elderly black woman would ultimately transform not just his career, but his understanding of what it meant to practice law with integrity and purpose. The journey had begun with a simple piece of advice about sitting at the correct table. Now, 3 years later, Tyler Hamilton knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged.